Hey, I Mike Durfee here on from St. Paul Christiansburg, whose church is looking at and discerning moving into SAS. And then there are others who will be watching this video at some point who may either fit into the same category of church discerning moving into SAS, or are pastors moving into churches that have SAS in July, who are coming from churches that have not moved into that configuration. Additionally, folks on district staffs that may be tasked to do coaching for SAS. So hopefully I will cover all the bases. A couple of things that I want to emphasize that are critical resources. The first is, folks, definitely, and you can see this is my well-used expanded third edition of Mission Possible. And although a new edition has come out, I stress the importance of using this edition primarily, and that is because in the back of that section, there is a significant resource section starting in the back that is designed to allow for despite copyright, is designed for you to be able to use and copy for resources as you go through the process. So even though this new edition has come out, and I have copies, Mike, I have a copy for you. This new edition has come out, and this is a good one. And the reason it's a good one is, unlike the Mission Possible 3, this edition lays out chronologically the discernment phase, and then it adds a design phase, which is just amazing because each church in its different size and shape allows for a slightly different design. And then it goes into the equipping phase and the implementation phase. So unlike the other book, which gives a lot of resources, this one goes chronologically, and it also includes a designing phase. Now, I'm going to go back to this one in a minute, and then I'm going to pop up some slides. The other book that was written by Kay and Blake is Mission Possible for the Small Church. Now, this has been a good book for this district because we have a lot of smaller churches that are in some ways already functioning as simplified accountable structure, only because they're already small. So they just make decisions after church on Sunday, some of them rightly in the narthex, saying, okay, we need to write a check for this, or we need to pay the lawn mowing company, or, the guy who mows the lawn. So a lot of them function that the 10 people that are in church on Sunday are also the 10 people running the church. So they're already there. But this simplified accountable structure, the fourth edition, is equipping leadership for churches of every size, So it kind of incorporates the previous edition. Now, let me just say a couple of things before I get into the slides. Mike, we have a copy of this up here for you, and those churches that are already in SAS, plus the DS, the new DS, plus the new Director of Congregational Excellence also have copies. On page 15 of this new book, and you can note this down, it lists the primary purposes and benefits of simplified accountable structure. I'm just going to run through these quickly, but you're able to pull them up when you turn to page 15. And I'll go over these again as I go through the slides. But primary reasons are that more people are released and available to do ministry as you pull together your council, your SPRC, your finance, and your trustees. It removes bottlenecks in the decision-making process. I'll talk about that and give examples. It has established systems and procedures and policies that are implemented and designed to be both flexible and adaptable. The leadership board is responsible for the church's faithfulness to the Great Commission. So in some ways, the discussion at the table changes. So we're not talking about the color of the pew cushions anymore. but we're talking about the important things like people and discipleship and ministry. Guiding principles and accountability are in place, and leaders are held accountable. Those are just some of them, and I'll be discussing those. But that's on page 15 of this new book, Mission Possible for the 2026 and 28 edition that we have gifted to all of you. So with that, I'm going to move to share some slides. Hold on just a second. See that, Mike?
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay. So again, since you're the only one on here, I'm going to try and tailor this to you, but I also will have to kind of enhance things for those who are already in an SAS church or they're going to an SAS church. So here we go. What these slides are, and these are Kay Catan and Blake Bradford's official slides. This is intended to be an overview to help you kind of gain an understanding of simplified accountable structure. I have taken numerous churches either through the introduction or through the full process for purposes of this district. If you and your chair of your board are ever interested in talking about the benefits of SAS and how well it has worked in churches, Calvary United Methodist Church in Stewart's Draft is an SAS church. Granbury Memorial United Methodist Church in Covington is an SAS church. First Salem has moved into SAS extremely well. In fact, the current pastor, Alan Combs, has said it has been just a 180-degree turn in terms of people wanting to come to the meeting and having relevant discussion. Other churches, smaller churches that have moved into the process are Pleasant View, which is in Waynesboro. That has moved into the SAS process, and in Roanoke, Rockingham Court, and Mount Pleasant have moved into the SAS process. There are others out there. Christiansburg, Asbury is in the SAS process as well. So those are just a few. And throw out any questions you have as we go through the process. All right, so in the typical church, the structure is driving the mission versus the mission driving the structure. So a great example that I think of in this is, let's say you want to take a trip cross country, but you have a car that has 450,000 miles on it. So your desire to do what you want to do is held back based on what you have. In that case, your 450,000 mile structured car. And so if you think from that perspective rather than, hey, my family wants to travel cross country, see the Grand Canyon, and then go up and see Mount Rushmore, we're just going to have to rent a car. So we're going to have to change the way we do business in order to do what we want to do. And that's really what this slide is talking about. That mission needs to be the driver. And we'll talk about how SAS focuses on the mission. And then I'll get into some details. And at the end, I'm going to talk about the phased process. What a church like St. Paul looking at to start this, what your next steps would be. So the problem with most structures, according to Kay Catan and Blake, is that it oftentimes promotes disunity and dysfunction, and I would say not always dysfunction, but disunity in the sense that there's stovepiping, there are clear lines of authority. The trustees know what they're supposed to do. The finance knows what they're supposed to do, but not always clear lines of accountability. Oftentimes, all responsibility falls on the pastor without any authority. Then, as we see, nearly impossible to make difficult and timely decisions, and it ties up too many people in administration, leaving too few people for ministry. I'll talk about this again, but great examples. Let's say that an organization, and I watched this at one of our SAS churches, at a council meeting, an organization came in, a new member who'd been at the church for a little bit of time, had run a Taekwondo ministry at their Methodist church in Northern Virginia, and then they retired and moved down here. So they proposed to the council that they would like to start up a similar Taekwondo ministry as a member of the church, getting kids in for for martial arts in the church, like they had at their Methodist church up in Fairbanks. Now, this could have gone one of two ways. Under the traditional structure, they present to the council, and then the council forwards this to the trustees, which may meet the next month to review liability, use of the building, and all the logistical details for the safety and well-being of the kids and insurance coverage of the church. Then moving back to the council, the third month, for them to then forward to finance to talk about, well, what would be reasonable fees for this ministry to pay using our building. And then maybe coming back the fifth month to the council for a vote, only then maybe to reach the individual who's still coming to the church but says, oh, I found another location. This exact same thing happened at Calvary Stewards Draft as I was observing one of their early SAS meetings, and they did exactly what SAS is intended to do. This individual came, they made the presentation, everybody was gathered there as council, dual-hatted or quadruple-hatted as trustees, and finance and SPRC. After the presentation, they thanked the church member for making the presentation. Then they put on their trustees' hats and convened as trustees. They reviewed the proposal, but because of the way that an SAS meeting is structured, they all knew this was coming. They had an advanced agenda consent package, much like we have at annual conference. They had reviewed it, had known all the details, were ready to vote as trustees. Trustees voted and approved it, and then moved to finance in their role as finance. Again, reviewed details, costs, electricity, support of insurance, liability, voted, approved it, moved it back to council for a decision, all within 10 minutes. Instead of taking numerous months to go from one to the next, they did it very well. David Bond's a good resource to talk about that process. That to me talks about moving forward and making timely decisions on that 1, 2, 3, fourth bullet. So that is one of the benefits that I have actually seen in place in SAS. Mike, stop me at any time if you have any questions. All right, so here's the bottom line in terms of the three words: simplified and accountable and structure. Simplified meaning that it is one leadership board responsible for leadership and governance. So all administrative committee responsibilities are moved into one board: finance, SPRC, trustees, and admin. Now, there may be other things that go on, and I'll give you another example. Let's say that you have a large church in this case, when I briefed and did the introduction to Calvary Stewart's draft, about 50 people were there as the council. 50, 50. But the leadership board goes down to 9, 10, 11, maybe a little more depending on how you design it. So what happens to all those other people that were now in ministry? Well, they move into ministry teams. They could be a short-term ministry team, or they could be an enduring ministry team. A short-term ministry team might be the trunk or treat ministry team, or the Christmas pageant ministry team. A long-term team might be the property management team. Those are the people that are actually overseeing day-to-day operations of the building, because the trustees, like trustees of a university, are not mowing the lawn and cleaning the gutters. If you think about our trustees in the district in an SAS level, we have trustees in Christiansburg and Roanoke, but our one facility is here in Fishersville. So our trustees are not coming up here from Christiansburg to clean gutters. They are making decisions, and then we have a property ministry team of a few local laity from Methodist churches nearby who they authorize to and cap in their guiding principles to they're authorized up to a certain dollar amount to hire folks for whatever maintenance may need to come up. So that leadership board shrinks down if you have a lot of people. And you have other enduring ministry teams, the worship ministry team, the youth ministry team. I believe in your building, Mike, there was a facility on the other side of the parking lot that's yours that's used for some kind of ministry. Remind me what that is or was.
Yeah, that's an activities building that houses our baby shop. Scouts meet there, civic groups meet there.
Right. So you could have a baby shop ministry team or a scout ministry team. Yeah. And those would be enduring ministry teams. And they don't attend the leadership board, but what they do is when the leadership board organizes, one member of the leadership board is designated as the liaison to the ministry teams. So a rep from the baby shop, a rep from, the short-term or long-term ministry team programs that you're running, they submit reports to that liaison. That liaison will go through and pick out the things that maybe need to be reported at the leadership board. On paper anyway, in the consent agenda, just to keep people informed, but we're not going into the nitty-gritty detail. That information is passed for the record and situational awareness of the leadership board. The one thing I would say that's so important in this structure, and I've seen it work well, and this has worked well with Reverend Brian Betcher at Granbury and Covington, is this. Communication is critical. If you have less people on the leadership board than you had in all of these groups, then the bottom line is you need to communicate. And what Brian has done is when they first formed, he had each of his leadership board members do a pre-recorded video for Sunday morning introducing themselves. And then the chair of the leadership board later on would go and do a recording and just kind of give brief updates about decisions being made and things going on. Very important for the leadership board to be doing communication. All right, so in a recommended simplified structure, it's recommended 9 members. And the nominating committee chaired by you, the pastor, is always still required. And one of the things I do in the process and a coach will do for you is meet with your nominating committee to talk about the kinds of people you are looking for. Now, there are certain positions that are by virtue of elected position through charge conferences and so forth, are members of the Simplified Accountable Structure. And And so one is the lay member to annual conference. One is the lay leader. One is a board chair, and I'll show how this configures out in the next slide. But and then you want to try and have a youth member. However, a youth member can't necessarily, depending on age, be on the trustees. All serve as finance trustees if over 18, SPR, and council. And then you'll have some optional positions. If you have a chartered group like a nursery group or something, and these positions can be combined. Many of our churches do not have a UWF, or if they do, we want to have a UWF representative. Let me show you how this. Let's see. Yeah, we'll get back to that. So this is an important slide because really what it illustrates is the responsibilities of governance. Like I shared earlier, the nominating committee needs to pick people that can function in a variety of roles. The role of this board is stewardship, obviously, in their finance role. It's generative in the sense that we're looking now outward based on the structure of our meetings, discerning God's dreams and visions, thinking strategically, leveraging resources. A lot of churches, as I've discovered, working and doing I do a 7-phase strategic plan, which I've been doing with many of our churches over the last 5 years. Don't think strategically. They're thinking, well, we've always been here. We've been here 75 or 100 years, and we're going to be here next, the next 50 years. And if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Again, another church that's very good at that is Granbury Memorial. And what Granbury Memorial does is they have their leadership board goes to a state park, Douthit State Park, in November, actually, and they've asked me to come down this November. And they look at their strategic goals, their mission, vision, goals, and objectives, what they've met, what they've done well, what they need to change, what they need to add or subtract, and they do an assessment of how things are going. So very, very critical. Sorry, let me go back on that one. And then the other piece is accountable leadership, setting a culture of accountability. If I go too deep, it'll feel like I'm spraying you with a fire hose, but there are 2 documents that really a council works on to really align themselves. So leadership board, excuse me. One is a document called Guiding Principles. And the guiding principles really lay out, and there's templates for these. So you're not creating them from scratch. There are templates. These are our guiding principles for us functioning as an SPRC. These are our guiding principles for us functioning as finance. These are our guiding principles for us functioning as trustees, etc., for a particular church. The other document is a covenant. And a covenant oftentimes makes me think of the Declaration of Independence. I remember watching a movie where the drafters of the Declaration of Independence were going for weeks just arguing and discussing in Philadelphia how this was going to be shaped. And then at one point, John Hancock signed in big letters, the first person signed this document, and then they went back into debate again. And I may not exactly remember this as it happened, but as I recall, there was discussion that the British were coming, and he was the only one that had signed this covenant, this declaration. He said, hey, the rest of you better sign this thing because my name is the only one on it. Well, there's a covenant for a leadership board, and leadership boards develop their own covenant. What happens if you don't attend all the meetings? What are expectations for us in terms of confidentiality because we are strategic, we are SPRC. And too many times here at the district, I've gotten word about how SPRC has just uh, botched things up publicly. Either come out of meetings and folks are talking outside in the corridor while the choir is two doors down on a break, and church members are hearing about confidential things. We had one church that I've been working with outside of the district where the SPRC didn't follow procedure and announced that in December their decision to ask for the pastor to be moved. Um, and announcing that to the congregation before the bishop and the district superintendent had responded. So there are very clear lines in the covenant and in the guiding principles that they develop to prevent any of that. Mike, did you have a question? I see something on chat.
Yeah. For the leadership board, is a staff member like a director of youth ministry on the leadership board if they're covering, say, youth ministry or college student or older elementary?
Yeah, staff members attend but are not voting members of the board.
Okay, so staff can attend and
Correct.
have input, but no vote. And
Correct.
that's because it's paid position.
Yeah, and you want, based on the positions of people on the board, and we'll talk about that, you're really getting church members. So if you think about the various positions, you're going to have board members who are trustees. And then you have to ask yourself, well, wait a minute, is a staff member going to be on the trustees? You have to look at the various functions by discipline of trustees and how many. You have to have 3 trustees, SPRC, who can be on SPRC. Staff can't be on SPRC. And then finance and their membership. So it's an interesting mix. But for example, on the district here, I attend all the leadership board meetings. Donna Desper does, the whole staff does, but we don't have vote. But when called upon, we do provide input.
The director of youth ministry would be like a foot soldier, a chief foot soldier, or maybe a colonel, but not sit at the table of the general.
Correct. Oh, I like that. See, I love your military. I love your. Well, I knew when I was called to sit at the table of the chaplain of the Marine Corps, who is an admiral, when she was out and was called to sit at the commandant's table, that all the others were 3 stars. The commandant was a 4-star, and I showed up as a full bird, colonel captain, and sat at the outer circle until
the concentric circle. Yeah,
that's right. Until the commandant looked at me and said, "Chaplain White, get up here. Chaplain is a chaplain," and that's. But we don't function that way in the Methodist Church. So I ended up sitting at the only 06 sitting at the table with a bunch of 09s and 010s. Anyway, let me keep moving here. The leadership board sets guiding principles, but doesn't manage the day-to-day operations of the church. And that's kind of one of the things I talked about with the ministry teams. That the ministry teams, short-term or long-term, are really running things. So that paid staff member would be overseeing, those would be, you said youth and young adult?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, so those would be youth and young adult ministry team. And they'd be providing input to the chair of the leadership board. By the way, you're not alone in all of this. And at some point you can go, or your chair can go and watch another chair. I'll tell you who's done this really well. I don't know if you're familiar with First Salem, but Charles Dorsey, who's also a circuit court judge, he's the chair of their board, and they just moved into this. I mean, I just moved them into this, and he has really followed the structure. So I feel simplified and accountable we've talked about, and we'll talk about structure in a minute. But he's really followed the structure. And Alan Combs has said, for the first time in the time he's been there, people are excited and motivated to come to a meeting and actually have a meeting because of the discussion at the table. So let me move on to that part, and then I'll talk about process. I may skip some of these slides. Oh, I like this one. So this is the danger, and we've seen this happen. When you have different types of leadership styles. Now, the SAS really follows into this accountable leadership, mission-driven style. Whoops, let me go back. Autocratic is driven by one person, and we know what can happen with that. I mean, all you need to do is look at, and I loved him, Robert Schuller and the Crystal Cathedral, which is no more, driven by one personality. And that's often dangerous. And when that pastor-centered, personality-driven pastor leaves, sometimes people will leave and things don't work. But the accountable leadership really is it's mission driven there. Hold on a second. Responsibility and accountability are balanced. The responsible with authority and accountability, that people know their roles and know what they're doing and what's expected. One of the things that I learned a long time ago when I came to this job was the DS told me by virtue of your job, you are also going to sit on the leadership board. You're going to be the liaison to Embrace Center in Waynesboro. You're going to be the SAS coach. And so laid out a number of things for me. And, I learned a long time ago, if it's important to the boss, it's important to me. So I ended up having to take numerous roles. And that's the accountable leadership. Hey, we're accountable to each other, and we write our covenant as to how we're going to hold each other accountable. I talked about this before. Communication is important because if there are fewer people serving, then you really need to over communicate with multiple formats about what's going on, and you also need two-way communication. Hey, people need to be able to communicate with the leadership board in its multiple functions as trustees or as SPRC. Or as finance, and build trust with the congregation. If you have, Mike, how many folks do you have? If you were to total the different number of people up that serve on SPRC, finance, trustees, and council, how many would there be in general?
25.
You said 25?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you move down to 9. Now you've got 25 minus 9. So you got 16 people that are now freed up to do some other things. And yet sometimes people's feelings get hurt. Well, I've been in a leadership role doing this for 25 years, and now they've booted me, kicked me to the curb. No. And so it's so important to share on the right-hand side the decision, why this was done, clear missional agenda, decision-making alignment with mission effectiveness, and meetings are strategic, not reporting. Now, we're not going to get into it here, but this is a very important slide. Well, I will get into it here, and it's in the book, and this is what I really focus on and teach churches that have moved into simplified accountable structure. changing to a new structure is more than changing the number of people at the table. It's changing the conversation at the table. You've been an elder. How long you been serving, Mike?
41.
You said what, 31?
41.
41. So like me, you have watched annual conferences. I remember years ago at annual conference where they would go line by line on proposals and amendments. I don't know if you remember that.
I do.
And it was like, oh man, are we ever? And then we're there till 9 o'clock at night because there was some contentious amendment or proposal that's on the floor, and then someone has an additional proposal, and you're following Robert's rules. Well, in this process now, like we have at annual conference, we have a book of reports with a consent agenda. Everyone's asked to read it, and if you notice that, hey, the bishop will bring to the floor a large number of issues to vote. The annual conference votes on it, and then they end up having some guest speaker like they did a couple years ago, Michael Beck or one of these other folks that's speaking on a theme, and your focus is on ministry. Well, it's the same way in the local church. We change the conversation and the work at the table by doing two things. One is the pastor and the chair work together to push out to the board at least a couple weeks in advance a consent packet. That'd be the minutes of the last meeting, any hot button issues that need a vote on, a proposal from those ministry teams. Let's say, for example, that the trustees have determined that a new roof needs to be put on the church. So they have tasked the property ministry team to get 3 bids. So the property ministry team in the consent agenda said, well, we've gone to Christiansburg Roofing and Blacksburg Roofing and Reiner Roofing. And here are the 3 bids and what they give us. Now, it's expected that everybody has read the details of those bids. So when we have the meeting, we say, okay, we have 3 bids, and the recommendation from the property ministry team is to go with Christiansburg Roofing. You've seen their reasons why, and now we take a vote. And that's it. If there's a desire to we're getting Craig Newman in here. Hey, Craig, welcome. So if there is a desire to have further discussion, then that can be tabled to the next meeting. Here is the real focus. So since Craig just jumped in, I will just do a quick review. The 3 big changes in simplified accountable structure. And the other person on here, Craig, is Mike Derflinger at St. Paul Christiansburg.
Okay.
Is that you may take 20 or 30 or 40 people who are on SPRC, finance, trustees, and the council and move them down to 9. And so it becomes more simplified, and the nominations committee, it really has a significant responsibility to pick the right people, especially in its role as SPRC. Having been a Navy chaplain in charge of promotions for the Navy Chaplain Corps, when I arrived in Memphis at Navy Personnel Headquarters, the Admiral briefed all of us, not just the chaplain lead, but the JAG lead and the medical lead and the fighter pilot lead, that if any confidential information about these board proceedings is released, you will be court-martialed and will spend time at Leavenworth. Now that seems pretty serious, but I had 2 chaplains at Leavenworth serving time. The DS, Doug Forrester, has shared with me multiple times how SPRCs have not fully understood the critical confidentiality role that they have. And that is just one factor a nominations committee needs to take into effect when they're looking at a simplified group of around 9 or so people serving on a leadership board. They're entrusted with sacred responsibility. I shared with Mike earlier that I've been doing strategic planning with a church outside of the district, and it was just traumatic that the SPRC didn't follow proper procedure, and in the fall when they made a decision that they would submit whether they wanted their pastor to stay or go, that not only did they submit the paperwork, but before the DS or bishop even responded, they announced from the pulpit that to the congregation on a Sunday that we've asked the pastor to go. It's horrible, just heartbreaking. So this is a critical role. What I've watched at First Salem is nothing short of miraculous. And at First Salem, their chair has really done what a simplified accountable board is called to do. So, Mike Derflinger, for a minute, I'm going to shift a little bit of emphasis because, as you know, Craig is moving over to First Salem. And so my address in this briefing is both to pastors who are in churches that are considering SAS and pastors like yourself, Craig, that are going to churches that already have SAS. So a meeting of a simplified accountable leadership board usually is divided into 3 sections. The first section, or 30 minutes, is leadership and spiritual development training. And each member of the board is given a responsibility. They pass it around. It's not just an invocation or a quick prayer, that they work together with the pastor to align the spiritual themes and foci at the church with the focus of those first 30 minutes. So it'll be about 15 minutes of spiritual development and then 15 minutes of leadership development. Leadership development may be a presentation on something significant, a takeaway from annual conference, a takeaway from district conference, a takeaway from general conference, or something significant happening in the community. Maybe a presentation by a board member from the city council that they're running a new highway right behind the church building. These types of things. It's enhancing the awareness and providing leadership skills and awareness to the board. So that's the first 30 minutes. Now here's what's really cool about what First has done. First, the second half is looking outward. And looking outward, reviewing who are the new members by name. And in their last leadership board meeting, they spent about 30 minutes going name by name. Who are the new members that have stepped foot into our church? Have we underwhelmed them? Have we overwhelmed them? Have we whelmed them at all? And they're obviously doing a good job because they're retaining a lot of these new folks. So it's a focus on people, and it's a focus on missions, outward missions. Remember, one of the primary foci of a leadership board in simplified accountable structure is generative, generating outward-looking opportunities for ministry. And then the last section, and First does this very quickly, is reviewing the consent agenda and making any votes. And they, again, do this very well. And all of the data, financial reports, minutes, everything is pushed out by their chair, Judge Dorsey, in advance. He is, I've said, of all the 9 or 10 churches I've done this with, Calvary, Stewart's Draft, and First Salem have done this as models, and I've shared that with Kay Catan. So, but it's changing the conversation at the table. We're not talking about the color of pew cushions. Those are tasked to the ministry teams that are subordinate and report up to a liaison. Now, I know you're jumping in here, and there are a lot of details I've already hit, Craig, so you can, this is being recorded, so you can, review this once we post it online.
And you had shared with me Mission Possible, so I've read the book as well.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. And then there's a new copy here for you.
Okay.
And this is Mission Possible, the green one.
Okay. Yeah, I just have the red one.
Yeah, and that one you've got to keep because there's
Okay.
there's data in there that's not in here.
Okay.
As I shared with Mike earlier, the difference is this one is chronological, going from the initial discernment phase, which your church has passed, and design and equipping, and now they're into the implementation. So this gives it a chronology, but it also has a nice design. I have copies of these with stickies on them for both of you and everyone else up here on the conference table. The next time you're passing by Fishersville or coming up for annual conference, just
Okay.
pop in.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Now this would really apply to Mike and Maeve Perrin, whose church is thinking about it. Should my church adopt this? And I got to tell you, I've been doing this for 5 years. I didn't realize I was one of the 3 coaches for the annual conference left. When I first got into this, there was one for each 8 of the 8 districts, and now we're down to 3, and 3 coaches. And when I left the Navy, and the Navy really funds religious ministry at a significant cost. They pay a lot of money for religious ministry. So when I left, I asked myself, gee, I've been asked to come back to the local church. What is exciting and significant in the United Methodist Church today? And I got to tell you, from my perspective, coming from institutional ministry back into the local church, 2 things to me stand out. And I shared this with Bishop Bickerton, my bishop in New York recently. One is fresh expressions. I just think it is Wesleyan through and through and current. And the other one is simplified accountable structure. We're running a lot of our churches under a 1968 model of many boards, and this I have seen functions very, very well. It holds people accountable, and it changes the conversation, and it makes things function much more efficiently. For purposes of the recording, I'm going to repeat a story that I shared with Mike Derflinger earlier, and that was an observation I saw, Craig, at Calvary Stewart's Draft. A member of the church had been a member of a Methodist church in Northern Virginia, and he is a multi-black belt in Taekwondo. And he ran a Taekwondo ministry in his Methodist church. And then he moved down here and joined Calvary Stewart's Draft, as I recall, and came to the SAS meeting saying, I would like to start a similar meeting, get a lot of young people into the church in this Taekwondo ministry. Now, he laid out all of the details, and it was distributed, as it should be, weeks in advance in the consent agenda. So everyone had read it in their role as trustees and finance and leadership board. So after he was finished, in the old structure, it may have gone like this. Okay, the council has heard this proposal. We're going to send it to trustees for their meeting next month to consider whether our insurance coverage and liability, etc., is all in order. And then they'll refer it back the next month to the council. So then the council gets it back, and in another month say, okay, now we're going to refer this to finance to see whether we need to look at the costs of keeping the church open, the heat, maintenance, storage, equipment, lighting, etc., and then we'll bring it back to the council. It could take numerous months to make a decision. And what I watched David Vaughn and Beth Otto do was absolutely brilliant. Beth Otto, the leader of their council. They received the proposal. The church member left. She said, you all got the consent agenda 2 weeks ago. You've read all the details. We now convene as the Board of Trustees. Are there any trustees related questions based on that? No, all the answers we have in the consent agenda. So as trustees, we ask for your vote now. All in favor, aye. They voted. And then she said, and now we will convene as the Finance Committee, as finance. You have read the consent agenda and the details. Any questions about financial responsibility cost charging based on the proposal of our ministry teams looking at this? Nope, they voted, came back to the council, approved within 7 minutes. Not 5 months, but 7 minutes. And I sat there just in awe saying, yes, this is how it's supposed to function. I've got to circle back with David Vaughn to see how that all turned out. But it really does away with a lot of delayed decisions and moves things on. Okay, so now I'm going to focus a little bit on Mike Derflanger since his church is early on in this, but this is what First Salem just did. So the discernment phase and churches are in different places in this process. Kay Catan really focuses on the first quarter of the year. I'm a purist for Kay and Blake up to this point. At this point, I'm no longer a purist because not every church is in the same place. And here's what I've discovered. Some churches that are thinking about doing this, there's a 6-month discernment phase. But Mike, you got to tell me, some churches, by the time they get to this and people have read the book, they're like, hey, we're ready to go. We do not want to sit around and discern for 6 months. We're ready to rock and roll. What are you thinking, Mike?
Thinking people will want to change quicker.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not sure if they want to wait a whole year.
Yeah, exactly. And that's been my experience because you're going to make decisions in the charge conference season. Although churches with elders are a little different, you can have your own charge conferences. You don't have to wait for a DS. You don't have to wait for a district conference to make a decision or the charge conferences in the fall. You can do these. So there's the discernment phase, which I've discovered many churches have been thinking about this. First Salem, they had all read the book. And Alan had read the book and had written a summary, a white paper, kind of. So they'd all had this guidance and they were ready to go. So it's now May, and I really started to work with them.
I think they took a pretty long time. I was a little surprised by how long they took.
Yeah, actually you're right.
I think they took a full year.
Yeah, I briefed them a year ago, but there were other things going on. And so I think I'm not sure that they were discerning through that whole process. They'd had some presentations. I presented and Alan presented, but then, life gets in the way.
Sure.
And so they kind of held things, but they moved into it even after it was announced that Alan was going to be the DS, which is a good thing because the church needs to think big picture church. So then the next phase is, and I'll go into details, is equipping, and that's what a coach does. I've advocated that Paige Swan Presley get the training, that the conference paid for that so that she can be coaching and equipping and working through getting a church ready and then implementation. So let me dig down a little deeper into each one of those phases. So in the discernment phase, you're having the conversation in the local church. coaching would begin, meaning that, a coach, myself or Paige in this case, would come and make a presentation, this presentation, to the church council. And if the council says, hey, we want to look at this more seriously, then the pastor or the chair of the council requests formally to the DS that we would like to move in and move forward in becoming an SAS configured church. And then the discernment of the DS congregation and its leaders, if this is the right model in the church for the season. Some of our churches, are very small, and they say, well, we don't have but 5 people on a Sunday and 5 people in leadership, so we have to go this way. Well, maybe and maybe not. Just the size of the church is not necessarily the reason to go into it. The governance and the outward-looking mission focus is the reason for it. But once they decide to do that, then they'll go forward and have a church conference and make a decision that we want to move in that direction. So these are the discernment steps in a little bit more detail, and they're all in both books. The church council votes to explore, a letter from the council and pastor to the DS seeking permission, and approval from the DS to assign a coach. And as the coach, I have gone to many churches. Some churches I've gone to and given the brief, and then the church makes a decision. Yeah, it's a nice process, but we have 100 people on Sunday and 80 of them are over 75. So we're not sure what our future is. And so we think we're just going to keep doing things the way we are. And that's okay. But if they choose to continue to work through, then the SAS coach can get a little bit more detail, and you can do a prayer team and a discernment team. But really what I've done is after I brief and talk to the pastor, I get down to number 7, and the DS will actually ask me or the coach, well, what do you think? And I'll say, well, they're really ready to go, or I don't think this is going to work. But if we get the green light, then the DS approves, usually through an email. And then the coach would work with the nominations committee first to do some training on how to select people, because you're really tightening down the hatches in terms of who's going to be on the leadership board. And it gets to a good discussion with the chair of the nominations and leadership development committee, you, the pastor, because you may have smooth sailing, or you might have that one church member. Man, I did training, strategic planning training for a church in another district. I've done three other churches this spring in other districts, and I was shocked to learn that of the multi-million-dollar budget, one member gives 50%. One member contributes 50% of the $2 million budget.
Wow.
That scares me.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, you upset that one member, they're not on the board anymore.
Which is not very sustainable. Dale, I wonder, could you elaborate a little bit more on step 7 and 8? I'm not asking for specific congregation names, but what would you say is the percentage of congregations that have done this discernment and want to move in the direction, but the coach and the DS just don't see it coming to fruition? Or is it more of a failure to launch? Do you all approve it and then it just isn't working, and then you have to come back and intercede and say you might need to revert back? What has been the recent experience?
Churches that have moved into it and it hasn't worked.
Yes.
Yeah, all of the churches that I've trained have worked.
Okay.
And the recipe for that is consistency and just maintaining it. I mean, when the DS, as I said earlier, in the military, if something's important to your boss, it's got to be important to you. And SAS is important to Doug Forrester. And so, okay, that was not my position description, but it's important to him, so now it's important to me. Getting the training. I think I'm one of the few coaches that still continues to attend the mandatory quarterly training personally with Kay Catan on Zoom. None of the other coaches that I started with on the East Coast, I don't see them anymore. I'm on with coaches in the Midwest. And then the second piece of that, Craig, is that I follow up. I have a matrix that I send out to those churches, and I have a chart that shows where each of those churches is with a green check as to what the next step is. And I send that out quarterly saying, this is where you are according to my records.
Mhm.
And this is the next thing that I'm waiting for you to make a decision on. So I remind them regularly. And
Yeah.
and Paige will have that information. So let me just say, and so you would get that. Before
Okay.
I leave this position on June 30th, I'll push that out to all the pastors so you can say, okay, what's the next step? Now, in First Salem's process, I've attended 2 leadership board meetings and announced to them, okay, I will no longer be attending any leadership board meetings. You all are tracking. But one of the things that I will remind them is in their calendar, they need to set up a strategic planning retreat. Brian Betcher at Granbury Memorial is brilliant on that. In fact, he's asked me to come even in retirement because his church goes to a state park for 2 days, his leadership board, and spends 2 days in a cabin looking back. Okay, what were our goals and objectives? How did we do? What worked, what didn't, what needs to be revised? And then we want someone from outside. And in that role, I'm not the SAS coach, I'm a strategic planner to kind of help them think through. So First Salem, I believe, needs to set the one of the next things they need to do is set their strategic planning retreat. And in the Red Book, there's a whole guidance section on planning a strategic planning retreat in there. So, and Charles Dorsey, the chair, is just phenomenal.
Mhm.
So there's only 2 churches that I've gone to and briefed that didn't move forward. They for some reason, I don't know why. They're good churches, they're active churches, but some churches like their old structure. There are a
Yeah,
couple of churches. Yeah, there are a
I think
couple of
my
churches.
yeah, my assumption would be more churches adopt this and then it doesn't materialize and 6 months down the road they revert back into some of their
Right.
previous ways. I guess that would be more of my assumption.
Yeah. Now, there are some churches that I've attended that we moved into the process. Lance Presley, I think, is very good in terms of his church moving forward. But I attended their first meeting, and then I spent the night in Christiansburg and met with his team again the next day. And they said, "How do you think it went?" I said, "It was awful. It went horribly. You reverted to the old system." I said, "But that's to be expected. It's kind of like buying a new car." Where the windshield wiper and the turn signal are reversed from a car you've been driving 15 years. And so you find that every time you want to turn the turn signal on, you got your windshield wipers on. So that's common. And it's just, it's as Charles Dorsey said, he said, this system in some ways is so different from the way we've done business, but so important in thinking about a new way to run a railroad, so to speak, that it doesn't come naturally. You have to really think about it. And so that's why choosing the right leadership board chair is so important. Somebody that can think, word outside of the box, but think in a new way. And that's why nominations is so important in terms of picking the right person to lead lead the board. I have had some churches that went into the early SAS before I came on the district in 2021. And they've asked me to meet with them again and just show me their agenda. And I've gone through and said, well, you're kind of running things the way that you did before you went to SAS. So if you really want to follow the generative model, let's do a refresh. But each church is also a little different. Again, it depends on your leaders. Mike, who's chair of your council?
David Johnson.
Okay. And somebody that's in the know, like, and I don't know David, but people like Tom Bell. I mean, people that are in the know.
Right.
Those kinds of folks that are, and Tom works at Virginia Tech, right? And
Right.
so these are people that have institutional leadership background
Right.
and can think in new ways because institutions change all the time. So anyway, these are those steps. The church conference approves the SAS model. Nominations completes their work. A coach would walk through with nominations, and then you have your nominated leaders. And then what happens is the next phase, and that's the equipping phase, where the coach now starts trains nominations, and trains the new leadership board in terms of their roles, what they're supposed to be doing. And Craig, that last bullet is important because those churches that don't stick with it have not had an annual equipping by a coach. And so that is so important. And I may not get around to all the boards, but I get around to the pastors and double check, or if they have questions, or ask me to sit in on a Zoom of their meeting just to kind of review and track. Here's the other piece that I think is so important. Although leadership board members or chairs and lay leaders do not need to be certified lay servants or certified lay speakers or certified lay ministers, we're a connectional system, and getting them into that training is so important. Todd Delaney is Todd Delaney, Brad Delaney. Todd Delaney is another old friend. Brad Delaney trained his entire leadership board at Blacksburg, took them through the basic lay servant course, and many of them have then taken another course to become certified lay servants in the district. 18 of them. So I think it's important if you're going to do leadership development, any elder, and I don't know why I hadn't thought of this before, but any elder can teach the basic leadership course, and Brad did it for his whole board and then sent me all the certificates and we uploaded them in Unity, and I thought, why didn't I think of that? But it gave them a sense of their leadership responsibilities and roles in a connectional system. And it also allowed us to know, hey, now we know all these people that are certified lay servants are leaders in your church, and it establishes a leadership culture. All right, we're down to the last 15 minutes. And so, again, let me reiterate that for me, the big pieces in this are simplified, meaning you may move from 30 or 40 people, as Calvary Stewards Draft did, down to 9 or 10, and have a smaller group. So communication is important, training is important, people understanding the role of being generative and fiscally responsible, and strategic, thinking big picture. I shared earlier, Craig, that the trustees in a church, and I've been, since 1984, doing this in United Methodist churches. My father-in-law was a trustee. He's 92, and in his late 70s, early 80s shared with me, yeah, the trustees decided we were told we needed to redo our feeder line from the church out to the main street because they're putting in new water lines. And so I'm on the trustees. I said, so did you make a decision to get a, a company to come and trench out your lines? He said, oh no. He's about 6'5". He says, I hand dug the line. I said, you what? He said, oh yeah, I'm retired, so I just spent 3 weeks just with a shovel, just hand digging out the line. It was only X number of feet down. Well, simplified accountable structure is beyond that. The trustees, like university trustees, are making big picture, generative leadership decisions, and then ministry teams, short term and long term, like property ministry team or youth ministry team or child development center ministry team. They're the ones that are actually doing the work and reporting back to a member, a liaison member of the board, as to what's going on. Short-term ministry teams. Let's say that First Salem hosts the district conference again. God forbid. Craig's like, God forbid. But you might have a
Nothing is coming.
district conference ministry team of folks that are planning for the 3-hour event. That would be a short term. A trunk or treat ministry team, a Christmas pageant ministry team. That gives those people who are no longer on one of the boards opportunities to do hands-on thriving ministry. So, all right. With
I
that,
heard, I'm sorry, I had
go
a
ahead.
question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was at a training recently with uh, a colleague at a Northern Virginia church, a large membership that has switched to SAS. And one of the best tips he had was even though your actual leadership board is small, 9 to 10, 12 people, still communicating to the larger congregation lists of your other active groups and committees. Do you have a best practice or tips of way of doing that? Or is it just as simple as in your written and digital communications, just including those names of those other people in the subcommittees and the other kind of break off groups? Have you heard of how that's best done?
Yeah, and I saw so if you can do announcements pre-recorded, I was down and saw I don't know if you know a pastor named Amanda Weber. So Amanda Weber is at Oak Grove. And when I walked into the church and sat down, the big screen came on and there was Amanda Weber. Now she was around, but she had pre-recorded announcements and featured, I don't know if they're in SAS, but featured leadership board members. Now, Brian Betcher, after they went to SAS, he had each leadership board member pre-recorded over a course of weeks so they could introduce themselves. So people could know, hey, I'm on the leadership board. If you have a concern about the church, come and see me. I usually sit on the right-hand side of the sanctuary in the fifth. And then they also integrated some of the decisions and things that the board is doing. But then they also went and did leadership ministry teams. So people on the ministry teams could share.
Okay.
So many different avenues. I would say an electronic newsletter. If you have a good website to put on the website, the members of your leadership board. Of course, when you're posting names of individuals, you have to be very careful. But if you have, I've noticed that some of our larger churches that people have emails that the church has, Craig Newman at blacksburgumc.com or something, so that it's not your personal email, it's a church email, and they list the leadership board members. And then the same thing with those ministry teams. Of course, you have to have good communications people. and the resources to do that.
Mhm. Yeah, I think the colleague was just saying that some of the people who are not on the leadership board, uh, but are still on those ministry teams, very much valued and appreciated, still being acknowledged and recognized in ways. Um, so trying to figure out how to best do that is going to be interesting.
And then that would feed into your nominations committee. So, unlike many churches which have the same people on the board year after year after year after year, you're going to have those 3-year classes. So then you can look and say, okay, let's look at these subordinate ministry teams and who are some significant people that have been on our ministry teams who are not on the leadership board, and let's cycle them up and cycle a person off. Um, and that's any organization. I mean, I was talking to the district uh, commander, who's a retired Army colonel, and I said, "Well, I'm glad you're serving this year." She said, "Oh, this is my 15th year. No one else wants to do it." Well, this happens in churches quite a bit. So, hey, I see Mike Derflinger's great question. Does the nom committee nominate all short-term and enduring ministry team? No. Or to my knowledge, that's a good question I've never gotten. But other than those positions that are going to be voted on at charge conference, the ministry teams are not voted on. So I would say this allows for the leaders of those ministry teams to take on some real leadership roles in terms of discernment. Who should be on these ministry teams? I'll give you a great example. My first church, I was the associate pastor of the largest church in New York Conference. The pastor had been a former DS. Now, this was in the day when churches were big. We had 500 on a Sunday and 150 kids. And a young woman from the church came to me and said, "I'd like to help you and Linda with the youth ministry." And I said, "Well, let me talk to the pastor about it." And so I talked to the pastor, and he said, "No." And I said, "No." He said, she really needs to come to church at some point on Sunday to be a model for the kids, but she hasn't stepped foot in Sunday services in the 7 years I've been here." So, the pastor and nominations role in helping get the right people, because you can have a group. I don't want to get into too many details because I think this might be from one or the other of you about groups meeting in the church where people are adverse to some of the things that the Methodist Church or your church is doing, or they don't attend anymore. And then you got to ask, is this a pro or a con?
So did I hear you right in saying like the nominations committee is no longer having to say, uh, let's say, the group that goes and serves at the soup kitchen, we don't have to nominate all the individuals that are on that team that go and do that, but we still need to nominate the chairperson of that subcommittee? Is that what I'm hearing? No.
No, not from an official disciplinary standpoint,
Okay.
but I would say from a ministry efficiency standpoint.
Sure. Sure. Okay.
So those ministry team leads,
Yeah.
they're set free to recruit and gather their team, and that team lead can go into the congregation and membership and say, "We want you to serve on the bereavement team," or
Correct.
"We want you to serve on children's church and be a helper." And they take care of that vetting. They do the safe sanctuary. They do everything else. And if they have any hiccups, they come to the pastor as
Yes, you got
as the
yeah,
chair of
you hit the
nomination.
nail on the head. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, Mike. The only thing I would say is don't forget the title of the nominations committee. It's called Nominations and Leadership Development. And one of the roles is, if you've got leaders of those ministry teams, it probably would behoove the nominations committee and you as the chair to do some training, leadership training of those individuals that are leading the ministry teams. Let them understand the connectional system and the process, and maybe encourage them to become certified lay servants at the very least. But they're a little freer, and they don't necessarily attend the leadership board. They may report and give a report, and then that liaison will, gosh, in a large church like St. Paul or First Salem, you may have 15 or 20 subordinate ministry teams. Well, you're not going to hear from all of them at the leadership board meeting, but let them submit reports, and then let that liaison say, okay, here are 4 or 5 big things of the 10 or 15 coming up that I probably need to include in the consent agenda. But I don't need to include everything in the consent agenda because it's May, almost June, and some of the stuff they gave me is for October and November. So
each leadership board member is assigned a certain number of ministry teams to be the liaison?
No, just one person. So this is, and this will get down into the details. So you don't have a finance chair. You're going to have the chair of the board. And the chair of the board is highly recommended to be the liaison for SPRC to the DS.
Okay.
So the chair of the, but not always. In the case of First Salem, I believe it's somebody else.
It is, yeah.
Now, SPR trustees, after the first meeting of the year, the trustees, by law, select, by legal requirement, select a chair of the trustees and a secretary for the trustees. Secretary for the trustees is different than the rotating secretary of the leadership board.
Right.
And then those names get submitted. Chair of the trustees, secretary of the trustees, and then the rest of the members. So when it comes time, let's say First Salem is having a meeting and they have to make a trustees decision, then the chair of that board will say, okay, I now turn to the chair of the trustees to run this part of the meeting. They convene, they close, goes back to the chair. Now let's say they have SPRC matters. In the case of First Salem, the chair of the board, which is also SPRC, is also the brother of one of the associate pastor.
Yeah, that's why they chose. Yeah, Charlie is the trustee chair, not SPRC chair, for that exact reason. He recuses himself at the end because of his relationship with his brother, who's the associate.
Exactly. And so that is a unique exception on the district that we had to set up for. Mm-hmm. And then you'll have a person to act as the liaison to these ministry teams. And they'll just kind of pick and choose their reports. And then, like I showed earlier, and it's in the book, you're always going to have the lay member at annual conference, and the lay leader, other significant roles, and you want to try and get a youth member. I know Stewart's Draft, Calvary has a youth member, First Salem has a youth member, and they cannot vote on trustee matters.
Is the chair of the trustees an automatic member of the leadership board?
Yeah, they have to be. And if they're not a member of the leadership board, then they have to come off as chair of the trustees. I know what you're saying. So you may have a chair of the trustees now. And so the nominations committee will need to think carefully, is that person? And I ran into this in a church where they asked me to do a refresh. This is a church I had never done anything SAS on. And in the last month, they said, would you come and do a refresh? So I met with the council and I said, you know, you're all SPRC, you're all trustees. And one guy who's on the trustees said, well, they put me on the trustees because I mow the lawn. That's all I want to do is mow the lawn. I don't want to talk about finance. I don't want
Right.
to talk about staff. I just mow the lawn. I love getting out there on my John Deere. Well, then that falls into nominations not having done their job. That wasn't that guy's fault. Heck,
Sometimes you have a leader, sometimes you have a leader like that who likes to do certain things, but they have the goodwill of the board of trustees. They have a personality that um, is warm and engaging to the board of trustees, but may not be what is needed on the leadership board.
So then they would be on the property ministry team.
Right. But even if they are the chairperson of the trustees, they they don't necessarily go on the leadership board because they don't have the fit. They don't. It doesn't. It doesn't fit strategically. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
They could do, then they could be on the property ministry team.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, of course, this has, then you get into diplomacy. You know, that chair of the
Right.
trustees might be the guy who's contributing 50% of the $2 million budget. So this is where in this book, she has a new chapter called Design Phase, which you know, because, you know, you have to look at the design. I mean, you know, Craig, you know, he's going to a church where you're going to have a different person as SPRC chair from the chair of the leadership board. It's a matter of there's kind of like I before E except after C, but then here's 6,000 exceptions. And so you know, it's looking at each exception and what is unique in your church. And that's where your coach should come in and tailor. This is, I got to tell you guys, and I'll leave this, and I know this is being recorded. This is a tough time for me retiring and stepping out of this role because I'm invested in this process and I want to see churches succeed. But you know, at some point, you know, you got to draw the boundary and let the new person take over. And I'm one of the few coaches that's not to beef up my reputation, but Kay Catan has pushed my name to other conferences. I have churches all up and down the East Coast wanting me to come and do simplified accountable structure with them. And I'm having to say, I'm sorry. You know, well, we'll pay for you to come to Miami. No, that's quite all right. You know, but I like this, you know, but there's, you know, and I'll always be around if you have questions. I'm not going to look at the phone and say, oh, it's Newman. I'm not answering the phone. Or it's Derflinger. If you got questions, ask me. I'm really pushing Alan to get page trained and page trained quickly.
Yeah.
And I'm also working in the next month to spend some time. She's going to watch this video. Hi, Paige. You know, to get our churches up to speed because I really think it's a great system. Any other finals, gents?
No, I appreciate your
Well,
time. Sorry, I couldn't get on sooner, but appreciate your time and sharing the resources with us.
indeed. Well, as I say, you have books up here, the green books with your stickies on them here in the conference room. Craig, congratulations on First Salem. And Mike, congrats on a church, I think, interested in pursuing and moving forward. And you've got a number of great folks there that have moved into and are close to the lay speaker certification process. Priscilla, and I think you have one or two others. And obviously Tom Bell. So you've got folks invested. And when I came to preach at your church on the sad occasion when you had to be away for the passing of your mom, I was just shocked to be surrounded by a flock of kids in churches where there aren't many kids. When it came time for the children's message, I was surrounded by a whole host of kids. So just exciting ministry times there at St. Paul Christiansburg.
Thank you for all that you do.
Bless you. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much, and we will have this posted somewhere on the district website once Kim Johnson gets to it. If you'd like to review it again. Thanks so much. Have a great
Okay.
day.
All right. Thank you,
Thank
Cleo.
you.
Thanks.